Thanks. Cool. All right, well, let's just dive right in. So thanks for having me, GeekWire, and thanks everyone for attending after lunch. I think a good place to start is to ask our panelists to briefly introduce yourselves, and as part of that introduction, maybe if you could tell us about your organization's cloud adoption. So how do you think about the cloud? Do you think of yourselves as cloud first? And sort of what have you done? What kind of cloud services do you use? What percentage maybe of your workloads are running on the cloud, so that we can get sort of an idea of where you're coming from. So let's start with you, Janice.
With me?
Sure.
Hi, everybody. Janice Newell, Providence, St. Joseph Health. Just one sentence about our organization. We're a $24 billion health organization, and we're in 7 states, 50+ hospitals, 850+ clinics, a couple million covered lives. So a fairly significant organization. And how would I classify us in terms of cloud organization? I would describe us as we're a hybrid organization. Like most healthcare systems, we have a lot of legacy technology. And probably the most significant piece of our legacy technology is our electronic medical record. And it's an on-prem, but our approach right now is anything new that we're doing is all being done in the cloud. Also, a lot of our analytics workload is being moved out to the cloud. So I would say we're a hybrid, and a percentage of workload probably between 10 and 15% right now, just because the medical record is such a heavy percentage of our workload.
And when you say 10 to 15%, are you including, is that SaaS, is that infrastructure as a service, are you using platform as a service?
It is all of the above.
Okay.
It's the SaaS applications, infrastructure as a service. So.
Great, okay, yeah. Okay, Charu?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. So I've been with the Alaska Air Group for the last 16 months or so. And just a little bit about Alaska. So with the Virgin America acquisition, Alaska is now the 5th largest airline in the US with revenues in excess of $8 billion. We serve 115 destinations and 1,200 daily flights to within the US, Canada, and Mexico. And we have the privilege of flying the most direct flights out of the West Coast, so hashtag most West Coast. So who all here loves Alaska Airlines? Great. So I would say we've been on a transformation journey, and that journey not only touches our 44 million customers, but our 23,000 employees and all the partners that provide great service. And cloud is absolutely at the foundation of that journey. Our philosophy is cloud first. We have, our preferences are SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, on-prem in that order. We're pretty much a .NET shop, so Azure made more sense for us, though we are multi-cloud. And we focused more on PaaS just because of being able to transform our capabilities and the kind of work we're doing. We have a lot of heritage technology. I'm trying to use heritage versus legacy, just to see if that sounds better. But so that provides its own challenges of when to move it, should we move it or not, and how to move it. So we started on our journey with Office 365 4 years ago, and now we have about our workload since then. We moved to Azure. We started Azure 2015. So in 2.5 years or so, we've been sort of doubling every year. So if you look at just IaaS and PaaS, we're at about the 10% number. If you add SaaS to it, we're probably at about 30% of our workloads.
Okay. So can you both actually talk a little bit more then about the decision to move to the cloud, how you make that decision? So Janice, you talked about all sort of new workloads being in the cloud. Then how do you think about existing workloads? Do you have policy around moving those to the cloud? Or, how do you think about that decision, and how do economics play into it, and how does technology and performance play into it?
So I would say in terms of a policy, do we have a policy? No. Do we evaluate each situation and what are the economics of the situation? Does it make more sense to try to build up an infrastructure? I can tell you that now and moving forward, it's always made sense to go to the cloud for anything new. So is it going to be something that is going to, the processing power needs are going to vary a lot? If they're going to vary a lot, or if they're going to be high power processing needs, it's going to the cloud. If we're in a situation where we, of course, have too many data centers, although we have been closing them for years, but if we're in a situation where we are outgrowing the footprint of any data center, we're taking a look at the workloads in that given data center and going, should we move this out to the cloud now? Should we think about moving it to a different data center and moving other workloads out to the cloud? Each situation we evaluate based on the factors in that situation. But there's just nothing anymore that says bring in something new that's an on-prem solution.
Yep. Charu, anything different?
Yeah, I think very similarly, everything new is to the cloud. So that has been declared, and it's really an exception process when new things come in to say they go on-prem. For our existing workloads, it's looking at the nature of the workload, the elasticity required, but also the strategic nature of the function that it's performing. So where does it fit? Is it a competitive thing? Do we need a lot of speed and agility and need to move fast? How operationally critical it is to the airline? So all of those sort of factors are going into the existing systems evaluation. I would say since we focused on PaaS, economics have not been sort of the driver of it, other than when we've had licensing kind of issues with some of our products.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw you to sort of a curveball that I just thought of as you were talking. We didn't discuss this question earlier, but given that you guys are between 10 and 30% cloud right now, could you predict when or if you might be 100% cloud down the road? Like, do you think that's going to happen, and if so, when? Or do you think that would never happen? Do you anticipate there always might be a reason to run certain workloads on-prem?
Yeah, we've been doubling every year, and I think we're sort of poised to grow very exponentially right now, and we'll talk about a lot of things we've done recently that kind of point to it. I don't know if we'll ever be 100% based on some of the technologies we have, but I see that number changing quite a bit.
Yep.
And we have like 7 data centers right now. We had 4, now we have 7, trying to get it down to 2.
Going the wrong way.
Yeah, exactly. We shouldn't have merged with an airline, I guess, so.
Janice, care to make any predictions there?
Oh, yeah. Will it ever be 100%? Well, certainly not in my lifetime there. That's an inside joke for you. Anybody out there who knows me, I'm actually going to retire in 6 months. But will it be 100%? I don't think so. Healthcare has traditionally, we have been a best of breed industry where people have selected best of breed package applications. We changed that within the past 5-10 years, and we're going much more to integrated suites. And I mentioned our medical record. So I think probably one of the tipping points we will reach within the next few years is when we have to do something significant with our medical record. Whether it is we run out of real estate, given we want to decrease data center space, not increase it. So is it running out of real estate? Is it the technology that it's running on actually becomes more feasible to move to the cloud? So I think one of those factors is going to drive the change. Another We've both mentioned that anything new goes to the cloud. The end of last year, we selected a new ERP system, and to stick with our philosophy of anything new goes cloud, we selected a cloud ERP system. So that's probably the other mainstay in the portfolio is the ERP system. So that'll take a pretty good size workload off to the cloud. But the medical record, to be seen.
Yeah.
Going to be one of those factors, either the technology or running out of space.
Yeah, pretty important workload there. So can each of you maybe tell us a story, and you can choose either to talk about a cloud implementation that went horribly wrong, that you might have some lessons learned to share with the audience, or maybe you have a really interesting cloud implementation story that went better than expected, that again might offer some lessons learned. Charu, you want to start?
Sure. Can we do both?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah.
So I would say, in sort of learning and challenges and things that haven't gone well, even some of our larger SaaS providers, SaaS solution providers, I think, are on their own cloud journey. So we've had situations where, you do the right due diligence and you make sure that everything is in place for operational reliability and disaster recovery. And, you architect region availability and everything, and you sign an agreement, and then you find out one day it's not there. In moving something, pushing it to a test environment, production gets wiped out. So I think we've learned to trust but verify going forward, even with some of the large SaaS providers. And I think talking about what's gone well.
Wait, let me ask one question about that. But how do you do that? How do you verify?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like working with them to say, show me, prove me that you're testing it, you're doing your DR tests across your regions and all of that.
Eyes on.
Yeah. Okay.
Talking about what's been going well, so our story of sort of our shopping engine is actually a public use case. I won't talk a lot about that. Most recently, we've been on our journey to build sort of a real-time digital airline platform. So we have all our guest data and all our operations data, and we can start connecting all the dots and know everything about our guests. So in 3 months, we've been able to stand up a number of ODSs, build a service bus and all of the interaction and get real-time data out of our host systems. And actually, I think when I look back at that, that would not have been possible doing it on-prem in this amount of time.
Yeah,
and that involved people learning new technologies, trial and error. And one of the other things we found is we had to make some changes in architecture and selection of tools as we're going along it and as we found new things. And it was much easier to change our strategy on the cloud versus if it was on-prem, to have licensed a product and installed it and then go back and redo it. Right. So that, I think, has really sort of showcased the power and the agility, and the teams are very excited about it too, because they got to learn new technologies and can actually see it to come to fruition very quickly.
Yeah, great.
So mine is going to be, and it's not actually an implementation, but it's a cloud-related horror story. And not sure how many of you remember last year the WannaCry virus. Mm-hmm. Anybody spend any time on that? We, during that virus outbreak, we found out that one of our SaaS providers, whom we thought had all this great disaster recovery capability, business continuity capability, we found out they, in fact, did not have this capability. And so the application that we had running out in their private cloud was speech dictation for our physicians. As they're doing their notes, they do it with speech dictation as opposed to having to type it all in. Pretty critical for the physicians that get used to using that. And so this organization provided those services to us, and they got hit with the WannaCry virus, took down their servers for over 30 days. And I don't know if pilots fall in the same category as physicians, but when their tools are not working, it's not a good day. And so to have thousands of physicians that all of a sudden don't have the ability to use speech recognition to do something that they're doing all day long, doing their notes, is not a pleasant day. And so we ended up moving thousands of physicians from this SaaS-based service back to on-prem solution over the course of this time period. And that led us to, as you were describing, the due diligence you do, looking at a new organization and, significant names in the industry as we were looking for at a significant product last year. Shortly after this WannaCry experience, we went, and I say it's eyes on for us now when they tell us about their data center capabilities, their disaster recovery capabilities. And so the team went to actually check out the redundant capabilities, and frankly were horrified at what they saw in terms of the state of the facility, the processes that they have. And so it was about a 5-minute conversation that we had with this company, explaining that we couldn't continue down this path unless they were going to send us to better facilities in the event of an emergency. And so it took them about 5 minutes to give us a response of that they would in fact move where the redundancy was going to be. And so, it's like Alaska, it's a great example of trust but verify. Yeah. And to think about, I say this is a significant tech company, and that was the state of their facilities. So.
Super interesting, I think, kind of lesson learned for the SaaS providers in the house here. You're not going to retain and attract customers if you can't have the security and the backup in place. So, pretty interesting stories there.
And have really strong processes to make that switch over. And
interesting, you've both sort of been burned by that and obviously kind of changed your ways of evaluating younger startups in particular. So another topic I would love to talk to you too about is multi-cloud. So we've seen in our research this real transition from people talking about hybrid, which tended to be some on-prem workloads that might work in conjunction with something maybe running in AWS or something, to at least this theoretical ideal of multi-cloud, where you're using multiple infrastructure as a service platforms, and in a very ideal world, maybe being able to easily move workloads from one to the other based on cost, pricing, or even on functionality, since obviously some workloads might work or perform better on certain clouds. So I'm wondering, are you two thinking about multi-cloud, and how do you think of it today? Why are you going multi-cloud if you are, and what do you hope for down the road in terms of multi-cloud? Charu, you want to start with that one?
Sure. So our strategy is multi-cloud, and as stated as such. I would say we're heavily on IaaS and PaaS, right? On Azure right now. SaaS, we have a lot of different providers, and we sort of leave that open. I think we're trying to get better at one thing before we really do and can mature and have multi-cloud environments. It's looking at the complexity equation of what it adds, and then how do you really leverage some of the best of one versus the lowest common denominator of both. So I would say it's been stated, we're obviously developing our capabilities on one. We're looking at that to say, to what extent do we continue to be multi-cloud? Where does it make sense? Where it doesn't? So that we can really leverage sort of where we're going. And then ultimately we're headed towards containers and serverless. So, how does that play into that decision of us looking at it?
Yep.
So we're sort of in a little bit of a pause more to figure it out going forward.
Okay. Janice?
We are also multi-cloud, and I wish I could say that it was a very deliberate move that we made to get there, but it was actually, we own a variety of different companies or are partial owners in a variety of companies, and so we ended up with really all three of the primary cloud vendors through that. And so, but going forward, the team is actually looking at what is known as a cloud broker. And so it's a product from an organization that actually you load in the use case or the workload that you have that needs to, you want to run on the cloud, and then it takes a look at the three different providers and what are the economics for that given workload, what are the technical capabilities, and really tries to point you in which would be the best option for this particular work that you're going to move out, you're going to spin up. And so we're looking at that, plan to acquire that, so we can be much more intentional about which service provider are we moving any given workload to.
So do you envision a time that you might use a tool like that to move workloads, in a really agile way? Like maybe next month, one of the infrastructure as a service providers launches some new service or new pricing scheme, and it makes sense to move a workload, so you will.
Yeah. Oh, it'd be great to have that kind of flexibility.
Yeah.
Certainly the on-prem is the least flexible. The cloud is more flexible, but having the ability to move workloads between the different ones.
Yeah.
No muss, no fuss. Absolutely.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about how cloud adoption has impacted things organizationally and culturally for you. So, have you adopted things like DevOps practices and maybe tools that support those practices? And also from a cultural perspective, we do this interesting survey question where we ask folks in IT to describe the makeup of their teams, and the responses they're able to choose from are specialist or generalist or DevOps. And one thing I thought was really interesting, we asked this pretty recently, I think it was the end of last year, and something like, I think it's 41% of people said that they have specialists, and that's kind of how I would think of as the traditional makeup of an IT team, right? So you've got DBAs and network admins and people who have very specialized skill set. But I was surprised it's 30-something percent of people said they have generalists, and that's what I tend to see in the more modern organizations that are adopting sort of the really bleeding edge tools, because their people need to kind of pick up skills on the fly and be able to do a bunch of different things and work with different cloud technologies. But what I've also learned by talking to people is that transition can be really difficult. So if your organization has primarily specialists, how do you retrain them or get them excited about being a generalist if being a generalist kind of fits your technology adoption? So, any comments on that, on what's going on in your organizations?
Sure. So first of all, it has been a big change for the organization culturally as well as skill-wise, right? So it's required us to look at all aspects, people, technology, process part of it. I think we are doing DevOps, and we're sort of on this journey of some teams are full stack product delivery teams and have all pipelines automated, and we're pushing code out in 25 minutes. And then some teams are not there at all, and some are somewhere in that journey. And I would say the phasing is helping us because we're learning lessons along the way. So it's very hard to move the whole organization to that. So some of the teams that have moved first have sort of learned their lessons, and that we're applying to the next set of teams. So we have sort of a phased plan of rolling the whole organization through this.
So what's determining the ones that are like fully along? Is it all based on kind of the technologies that they're already using?
It's the technologies that they're using. It's the need for those capabilities to move faster, and then the constraints being less of the heritage technology, right? So all of that kind of feeds into that. So our e-commerce teams are probably the furthest along. Our teams that are developing a lot of our mobile technology for employees and guests, they're sort of next. And I think a lot of our flight operations that run the airline that are down for 30 minutes, we have a ground stop, those are probably sort of in that early journey part of it.
Yep.
So, and then, so I think the developers are really sort of embracing this and really want to have their own power, and they feel very empowered, and we have all kinds of interesting discussions on architecture and governance and how does that fit into the structure. So if any of you have developers that want to come work for Alaska and do your own thing, please do. That's my recruiting pitch. But we on the infrastructure side, we stood up automation teams, really to help build those automation and pipelines. And so that's where that change is starting. And now, as we're running more and more, and operational reliability is a key piece of it, we stood up a cloud competency center in the beginning to sort of set up and hold hands and help teams through this process. So that team is also, Bob's right here, he leads that team. And so their journey has changed, right? Because they've sort of gone through that whole journey with one whole set of teams. So I don't know what that percentage is between, the different things, but in the airline industry, and I'm sure in healthcare, there's a lot of subject matter expertise that is needed in IT and understanding how the airline really works and how the business really works. So we still need to retain that, along with how to really get speed and agility and iterative delivery and quality into the process, and then how to make it run reliably on the other side.
So has there been resistance along the way? Because obviously you're talking about a lot of change probably, right? In terms of compared to the way maybe things used to work, or have people been pretty excited about it?
Change is always brings resistance, and change is the only constant.
Yeah.
So I think people that have embraced it are really are setting the example for others. And I'm sure there are people that would resist that change, but it's a journey.
Yeah.
And they got to move along that journey. So we're all moving along it. So change management, skills, teams learning, I think a lot of that comes from, well, I don't know it, I can learn it, what will I do with it, what will it do to me? So we're trying to address all of those aspects of it.
Yeah, it's always nice when you have some success stories too, right? So when you've got like one or two teams that have done it really well and things are humming along really nicely, then other teams see it and say, all right, maybe this will be good in the end.
And then we've learned from doing, and we've learned from screwing up, all of the stuff, so.
Yep. Janice, how about you?
So we have an interesting environment and organizational structure in that I am responsible for all of the solutions and the infrastructure that go across the entire enterprise of Providence St. Joseph. And so an awful lot of what we do, as I mentioned a little bit ago, are packages that we configure. And I would say the amount of development that we do is relatively minimal in that space. And then the development team actually is over with our innovation guy, a gentleman by the name of Aaron Martin. So more of the developers are over with Aaron. And in terms of it, is it a real cultural change for them to move to working with cloud technology more? I don't think so, because this group has just been getting established within the past 2 to 4 years. And so most of the people that are part of that team actually came to us from Amazon, from Microsoft, a number of the tech firms around. So is it a major shift? No. Is it more of a shift with some of my teams and moving to different technology? Yes, because these are the people that have been around a little longer. And so is it tougher? Yeah. I think another, thinking about my teams, and one of the real changes for them is initially, as we started moving things to the cloud, there was a sense that, okay, this is happening off at the cloud now, I can let it go. As you know, that doesn't work so well because they're still accountable for having that technology working. And so that's been a real shift that we've experienced is, no, your accountability doesn't end as it's leaving our premises. It's still your accountability, and making it work with everything is still your accountability. But in terms of development, I don't think it's been that great. I would say we still have a lot of specialists in healthcare. We have our ambulatory specialist, we have our acute specialist, we have our oncology specialist, physicians, nurses. So still a lot of specialists, and we have quite a ways to go to get to the more generalist person working.
Yep. So you've both sort of opened the door to a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and that is monitoring and performance. And so I'm curious how you think about monitoring and getting visibility into the performance of your systems as you shift to the cloud. And Charu, I'm particularly interested, given that you guys are moving down the DevOps path, because one interesting thing I've seen is sort of initially when DevOps practices emerged, I saw a lot of organizations enabling these DevOps groups, and they did everything end to end, including monitoring. And that, works fine in terms of ensuring good performance. But as you move more and more groups into these individual DevOps groups, then you end up doing monitoring in all of these silos, and it's, you end up with 50 tools, different monitoring tools within the organization, sometimes, 10 instances of the same tool, and you're also spreading your expertise across these organizations. And so I'm sort of seeing this interesting 360 where some organizations are bringing monitoring into a centralized IT group that runs the monitoring tools, serves as the central expertise. And then the DevOps groups might still do a bunch of monitoring. They're doing it themselves, but they're not running the tool, the monitoring tool, and they don't necessarily have as much expertise as that centralized team. So, that I don't know if you guys are there, but in general, how are you thinking about monitoring and performance and ensuring that you get good visibility as you move to the cloud?
Yeah, I would say our maturity on monitoring has been very low, and that's not a cloud or an on-prem thing, right? It's just a journey that we're on. I think it's gotten better with the workloads that we're putting in the cloud because we're building those capabilities into it. So we do have multiple products, and we're in the process of how do we bring down the number so we actually can do something with what the monitoring is telling us versus just getting flooded with everything. So we do have a centralized group that is looking at it.
Cool.
And the more monitoring that we're putting in, it sort of attaches to eyes on glass, and then we can react to it. And then when we find that when we have issues, we learn what we're not monitoring, so we keep adding to that, because that's our first question is, why did this happen? Why did we not know about it? And then on the back end, we've put in, from a governance and a point kind of dashboards that are sent out daily, right, to teams that tell them what their usage is, and if it went out of bounds or something, then they can see and they understand it.
Cool.
So that helps us manage sort of the cost angle as well as the usage angle to make sure we're, using it appropriately.
Yeah.
And then it also creates this excitement of how that usage is going up.
Yeah, well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Janice, how about you?
We are definitely have a centralized group that is doing the monitoring across all of the different applications, infrastructure, et cetera. And the individual teams will monitor their, at least the big applications will monitor, but it's really very much centralized. like Alaska, we have lots of duplicative tools and are trying to thin those out. We also have a number of tools that send out so many on what's the configuration on the tools. Are they configured appropriately? And we're actually alerting us to the really important things going on. In terms of maturity and there for us, I would say that we're still improving and having an effective monitoring environment. I don't know your experience thinking of performance and reliability and all that, but one of the challenges we have found in the movement to the cloud is the reliability levels that we will get SLAs for. We have to really push to get to 3 nines. And in the medical industry, when that medical record is down, it's a real problem. I mean, there can be life-threatening situations that come up when the computers are down. So I don't know if you have the same challenge with getting the reliability levels, but 3 nines is not that exciting.
I mean, in the airline industry, obviously, reliability is kind of table stakes. You don't get to do anything else, and you don't have a job if things are not reliable. I worry about people that sign up for reliability but don't actually have it architected into their offering. So, and the other thing I'm finding is, even if our providers can sustain that reliability, we are part of that equation now because we're screwing up and causing issues. So it's a learning on both sides. And in some cases, we've sort of actually built in DR between cloud and on-prem to kind of learn and then let go of the angle. So one of the things we also look at on our dashboard is sort of the health, which includes this reliability, security, compliance angle.
Oh, nice.
And a lot of things are red because they're not there yet.
Yeah.
So, but we're starting to monitor that to bring that in.
Yeah, you got to measure it to know whether or not you're off. Yeah. So we have just a few minutes left. I think there was possibly an opportunity for a Q&A. If anyone has any questions, I don't know if Anyone have anything you want to ask our esteemed panelists? Oh, cool, we've got one. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Tom Krause from GeekWire. Janice, who was the SaaS provider that sort of left you in the lurch there?
I think I will pass on that question.
Well, I thought you were going to retire in 6 months.
She'll tell you 6 months later.
It's end of the year. I'll tell you in 2019.
Okay, give me a call. Okay, thank you.
It's a major player, though. Be sure and look at those data centers.
Anyone else? Looks like we've got another one here.
So, hello. As you guys move over to the cloud, 30%, 40%, 50%, hopefully, where does security and compliance, such things, especially in the healthcare, and I'm sure even in the airline industry, come into the picture? And how does that impact decisions?
2 minutes on the countdown.
2 minutes on security. So, in healthcare, we have very stringent rules about our responsibilities to protect and keep secure patient information. And so we were actually fairly slow moving to the cloud at the beginning because the different service providers would not give us any kind of or would not give us significant enough liability protection that was anywhere near the kind of liability that we were going to face if there was any kind of breach with patient data. And so we're doing this calculus of, okay, what's our motivation to move our data out there when we're going to face a huge potential liability, and they're not willing to stand behind it and assure that they're going to at least make us partially whole in the event of a breach. And so it's still a challenge getting the kind of assurances that we're looking for around the security of patient data. If it's not patient data, not as big an issue for us. If it's also, a lot of patient data out there that's de-identified, not as much a concern either. But I say the liability for us, you guys have probably seen the headlines of the many tens of millions of dollars of liability settlements for breaches. It's still an issue with service providers.
Very similarly, airline security and safety is job one. And I would say, to me, it's not about security just on the cloud. It's a focus area, whether it's on-prem or on the cloud. And it's really partnering with all our providers to make sure they're doing all of the things that need to be done to keep secure. And hopefully they can move faster than us, because that's their business, right? The cloud is their business versus we're sort of, trying to support an airline. So security is just, it's top of mind. But it's not just that it's the cloud, so it's across all our footprint.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah, quick.
One thing related to the whole GDPR regulations, in terms of actually deleting data or data obfuscation or such things from a user point of view, are you guys impacted at all? Maybe talk a little bit about your journey through the last 6 months.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Yeah, GDPR. I think we're not as impacted, but we're working through sort of, as we grow, how that impact is going to be for us.
Do we have time for one more?
Data prevention.
Yeah, real quick.
European.
Last question.
Well, it's another follow-up. I also wonder how you think about the risk of your heritage or legacy applications, because, for example, all the ransomware attacks are on heritage applications. Those aren't cloud attacks. So it's nice to, the status quo is there, and it's going to be there if you don't do whether you do anything or not. But how do you assess the actual risk of keeping some of those things around?
I think there's risk of many different kinds, security being one, but not even having people that understand those technologies in the future. So we're on a path to get off of things and look very carefully. I mean, some of our operations technologies are sort of our crown jewel, right? They're on the airline. And so very carefully modernizing, building capabilities, making them smarter as we modernize them, and then, cloud or on-prem, making those decisions. So that's something we talk about in our board meetings all the time, that risk.
So we are actively working to reduce the size of the portfolio and all these. Charu has a heritage. We have legacy.
Yeah.
But we are actively working and have been working to reduce that portfolio. We have over 3,000 applications now. We want that to be lower. And the portfolio grew to that size as a result of we're an organization that was created through a number of different affiliations, mergers, and so the portfolio just keeps getting bigger. And as it gets, and as new organizations come on, we move them as quickly as we can to the common medical records. That's really the primary focus for us, like your operational applications. How quickly can we move it over? Although I say how quickly can we move it over. In the case of St. Joe's, which joined together with Providence just about 2 years ago now, it's actually a $400 million project to move them on to the common medical record. So moving them quickly in an industry with really thin margins really isn't all that quickly when you consider about other kinds of industries, but that is our goal, is to move to the common solutions and weed out all of the thousands of others applications.
Cool. All right. I think we are out of time. So thank you for your time, and thanks everyone for your questions and attention.